Hey guys, you're listening to episode 175 of the Finish Line podcast, where we discuss the intersection of faith, generosity, and personal finance. My name is Keelan, and I'm here with my co-host and brother Cody. How do you slow down your soul when the work of God feels urgent? Today, we're joined by Kristen Welch, author of multiple books including Rhinestone Jesus and Raising Grateful Kids in an Entitled World, and founder of Mercy House Global, which empowers vulnerable women and families in Jesus' name through job creation, orphan prevention, and spiritual discipleship around the world. Kristen's story weaves faith, generosity, parenting, and leadership in a deeply personal way. But amidst all that God is doing through her, Kristen reflects how her greatest treasure has become simply spending time with God. If you are already living with a sense of mission and purpose, but long for deeper intimacy with God in the midst of it, this episode is for you. Before we get started, we've spent years speaking to and learning from some of the most passionate givers and leaders in the world. We've distilled down some of the most impactful frameworks, strategies, and tools into short weekly emails that leave you with practical ways you can take your generosity journey to the next level. If you aren't already on the list, you can sign up for free at finishlinepledge.com. And with that, let's get started. All right, we're here today with Kristen Welch. Kristen, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Can you start us off just telling us a little bit about maybe what life was like growing up? What kind of home did you grow up in, and how did you come to know Jesus personally?
Yeah, I grew up in a Christian home, actually with first generation Christian parents. So none of us knew any different, but it was trial and error, I would say. We didn't have grandparents or aunts and uncles or anyone who were Christians. And so in some ways it was isolating, but my parents had a really profound experience as new believers and dove in 1,000%. And so we never missed a service. So it was a sweet childhood, but sometimes plagued with long progressive sanctification, just becoming more like Jesus over time. But my parents were generous. They grew up with nothing. They married and had nothing. But my dad's sort of a self-made man and didn't really have anything to speak of until all of the kids left for college, and it was just he and my mom. But he still modeled generosity, and really, at the time, they seemed like unique ways, but he had a really big heart for missions. And the church that they were saved in also was just a church with a missions emphasis. And so it was very common for my dad to just give everything we had to missionaries and to unreached people groups and Bible translation. And so growing up in that atmosphere, it was just really normal to share what you had. And I'm really grateful for that. I don't know if it was always the wisest decisions. And sometimes my mom would, driving home was like, "You did what?" So we were also learning that too, to be wise, but the motive and just the heart behind it was, as kids, I was always really proud of that we loved people.
So Kristen, as you got older, how did this start to influence the way that you made decisions when you were out of the house and finding your own way?
Yeah, I think you just do the next right thing. I ended up going to Bible college and meeting my husband there and going into full-time ministry. And so that sort of lends itself to a life of sacrifice in a lot of ways, and not necessarily, we had no money at all, so we weren't really generous with our possessions, but we were generous with our time and also just sharing what we had. And that really spilled over into when we started having children, always looking for ways to use what we had for really the gospel of hospitality, an extra seat in our vehicle, an extra chair at our dinner table. And thinking about it, I think my parents probably modeled that. We always had people over, watching them do the same thing. But I don't know if I'm probably just now thinking through that my decision and my husband's decision to do that probably started because it was modeled for us. But yeah, the opportunity to share your resources, your time, talent, whatever it is, it definitely began in a very organic, small way for us.
Now, I know along the way, blogging became a significant part of your journey. I'd
Hmm.
love if you could kind of connect the dots to how that began and what that journey looked like for you.
Yeah, it was this weird time on the internet. It was kind of before social media. When I look back now, I thought it would last forever. And it was this really unique time where it was before the influencer age. That wasn't even really a coined term. No one was really doing anything for money on the internet. I mean, moms, but we were finding community. And so the mom blog world, I think it probably only literally lasted 10 or 12 years, where it was, I mean, there are still mom bloggers out there today, but it's because of social media, it's more like micro blogging now. And you have the influencer age, but this was like between like 2007 and 2016. So there's just this little period of time where I'm actually an English major and I love writing. And I went to college because I wanted to be a writer, but no one would read what I wrote. And it was really hard to get published. And I really didn't have anything to talk about, also. So, mom blogging was just this perfect intersection. There were lots of other women like me who were raising their kids. There were easy platforms to sort of launch a blog on, very user friendly. You didn't have to know much about technology. And it was just this collision of this sweet time where it didn't feel unsafe or toxic. It was really kind of pure. And I stumbled upon a Christian mom blogging community and really found a home there and ended up getting hired by Dayspring, which is owned by Hallmark, to help form the first online women's community. And so a lot of women who are now very well known writers we all started, there's about 30 writers in that initial group. And we've all launched, and I went the nonprofit route, and other people went the New York Times bestseller route or the Young Living Oil route, I think was the third option. But it was this time that we'll probably never see again, is this new era of blogging that connected women in a really intentional way. And through that, Compassion International, somebody there recognized there's a lot of moms reading blogs, and we should harness all of that. And so they started taking these blogging trips where they would invite, and again, this was before the influencer age. And so it was very cutting edge, I would say, for this nonprofit to invite a group of bloggers who didn't know each other to a developing or third world country for 2 to 3 weeks. And you would write about poverty and get kids sponsored. And so I think that's really when my story changed. Was I was invited on one of those trips in 2010, and I'd been blogging for about 3 years. And at the time, I had probably 1 million women reading my blog every month. I had a very big readership. I was making $0 because that's not why we did it. I also didn't know how to make money. Like everything just wasn't what you did. And then some people learned how to monetize their blogs, but that was never really my motive. I just wanted to connect with women. And so I think it was a sweet spot for me. I was meeting this internal need to connect with women, and I was getting to use my passion for writing. And before I went to Kenya, it was very self-serving. So the opportunity to use the writing skill and the blog and that platform for God's glory really became a sweet spot for me. And so it changed my life. There's no other way to put it. That trip was very eye-opening, and I had a choice to make. And I remember the last day of the trip thinking through how I was going to re-enter back into my middle class normal life after being exposed to extreme poverty and the world's normal, which was very different than my own. And I was broken wide open, just really, probably there was some shock, culture shock, and a lot of maybe regret for how I'd spent my money and how I had lived for myself and not served people. And so it was just all of these emotions. And the last night of the trip, I remember the trip director was like, everyone's going to go home and respond to what you've seen. And your response could be to do nothing. I hope that's not your response, but sometimes doing nothing is as much as a response as doing something. And so he just really challenged us to be intentional with whatever we did. And so from that trip, I started Mercy House Global, which is a nonprofit that serves vulnerable populations. And that was about 15 years ago, but that trip was definitely a catalyst for, it opened up a whole new career for me, but more importantly, it really connected me with Jesus in a way that changed my life for the good.
Kristen, I'd love to hear some of the more memorable moments from that trip and also a little bit more about your response to do something.
Yeah. So if you've never been to a third world country or a developing nation, it's really hard to describe the differences, but I always try to do my best and just paint a picture of every sense is assaulted. What you're seeing, what you're smelling, what you're tasting, what you're feeling. And I was walking down the center of a path. It was about halfway through the trip. And every day, Compassion International kept exposing the blogging team to different parts of their programming. But every day was just a little bit worse, more rural, more extreme poverty, and, meeting people who were suffering really was just having an impact on me in ways that are hard to describe. And so about halfway through the trip, we are visiting the world's largest slum. It was the first time I'd ever been in a slum. And we had armed bodyguards on either side of us. And the further you go into a slum, the worse it gets, because the very bottom of the slum is where all the sewage runs. And rent actually is cheaper the further down you go into the slum. And so we were walking down into the heart of the world's largest slum where more than 1 million people lived in less than a 2-mile radius. And everything in me was terrified, afraid, and also just so angry. I will never forget the feeling of fist clenched and tears streaming down my face. And I was overwhelmed with anger. And that was shocking to me. Why am I so mad? And I remember looking down at my boot. We were wearing rubber boots because everywhere we stepped was unsafe, right? Just walking through trash and sewage and unspeakable things. And I saw these big drops hitting my boots, and I thought it was raining. And I realized I was just sobbing as we walked. And we stopped in the middle of this path, and our tour guide was talking to us. And I remember just closing my eyes and asking God how he could allow so much human suffering. There were children all around us. We were a spectacle, and they were calling out to us, and they were hungry and dirty and begging. And there were survival prostitutes, which are young girls who are prostituting for food, not money. There were people making alcohol out of jet fuel and selling it. There were children sniffing glue. I saw things that I'd never seen before. And I couldn't reconcile what I was seeing with who I believed God to be. I kept thinking of that little children's song, Jesus Loves All the Children in the World. And I questioned that. I was like, God, do you love everyone? Because there's so much suffering here. How can you allow this? If you love the world, how can you allow it? And the minute I asked that question, with fist clench and tears running down my face, he asked me the same question. He said, Kristen, how can you allow it? What are you going to do about what you see? And that is the moment that my entire life changed. And it'll be 16 years on February 10th. And I am going to spend the rest of my life trying to answer that question. What am I doing to help the vulnerable in our communities, in our world? I didn't choose to be born in North America into a middle-class life any more than a woman who sold her children into slavery chose to be born into a slum. And because of God's sovereignty, because of choices, parents, politics, who knows? Like, we end up where we are. We don't get to choose, but we do have a responsibility to share what we've been given. And for me, I was so ready to do something, and I wanted to live a life that mattered, and I wanted purpose. And I thought originally, I have this big blog and I'm writing, and I had just signed my first book deal probably 2 weeks before I went on this trip. And I'm like, in my mind, I had arrived. Like, literally, I'm a young mom, I'm a writer, I have a huge readership. Even though I wasn't getting paid money, I was like, every once in a while, someone would say, "Do you want to blog for a washer and dryer?" Or a Tempur-Pedic mattress, or to take your kids to Disney World. Like, that kind of stuff was in the early blogging years. But it was so about me, me sharing my stories. And here I'm a believer, and it was empty. It was empty, and it wasn't enough. And I wanted more, but I didn't know what that was. And God used the poor to help me find him. Another moment, if you'll allow me, that was so pivotal on this trip was we went to a kid's home that was a sponsored child through Compassion. His name was Vincent, and he was like 14 years old. And we were going to have like a tour of his home. And it was like the size of my master bathroom, the whole house. It was just so small. There were 6 of us. We could barely, like, shoulder to shoulder fit in his house. No electricity, no running water, cardboard walls. There was water dripping on us from like rain runoff. It was pathetic. It was literally pathetic. What I couldn't figure out was how this kid was so happy. He lit a candle and showed us. He dripped the wax from the candle onto this little piece of wood and stuck the candle in it and showed us how he would kind of illuminate the room in the darkness with this one light. And that's how he did his homework every night. And he would get up at 4 a.m. and go buy vegetables at the market and sell them before school so he and his brothers could eat. And it was called an orphan-led home. Both of his parents were dead, so he was the mom and dad. And he's 14. And he's filled with joy. And I'm just like, how you have nothing? How do you have so much joy? And so he's telling us about his life, and I'm just like busting to ask, like, what do you have that I don't have? And so he stops talking. He was like, does anyone have any questions? And I have always regretted that I was the woman who raised my hand, because I think it just showed my poverty of spirit, because I said exactly what I was thinking. I said, how can you be so happy? You have nothing. That is what I said to this kid. And he looked at me with so much pity in his eyes. He saw the poverty in my heart, and he said, I have Jesus, and he is enough. And I broke open, because I had Jesus too, but he wasn't enough. I wasn't satisfied. And so the last day of that trip, when I knew that doing nothing was a response, I knew I couldn't do nothing. And so, when you say yes to God, you don't know where he's going to take you. I didn't know I'd be here today. I didn't know what I'd be doing, but I'm really glad that I said yes.
Man, there's so many things I want to unpack from everything you just said. But I think one of the first questions that comes to mind is, I think that some people go through an experience like that is so kind of framework reshaping. Mm-hmm. And at the end of that, they answer that question that you first posed of how could God allow this, with the answer that either there is no God or God just doesn't care, or some
Mm.
flavor of that. How do you think you were able to work through that to a point where it actually deepened your faith and
Mm-hmm.
spurred you on to want more rather than to kind of put up deeper barriers and kind of push God away?
Yeah, I think probably some of it had to do with, we all have a unique perspective and what happens to us in our lives. We launch from that place. And I think I loved Jesus. I mean, I just, as a kid, wanted to follow God. And so never once did I question if he was real. I never thought about turning my back on him. And probably because, the closest I got was being angry at him and asking him how he could allow so much suffering. And when I felt just deep in my gut, he asked me the same question. It just made sense to me that this is our purpose. This is the body of Christ. Like, we are the hands and feet of Jesus. This is what we're supposed to do. So I almost saw it as like an answer. It was like, oh, I can be a part of the solution to this problem rather than making it about me. That was 16 years ago, and I've lived a lot of life since then. And I feel like the closest I've ever come to losing my faith without even realizing it was in serving God. It was, in the doing things that Christian leaders do, but not being with God. That also leads to spiritual death, but there's self-deception there. And so the enemy is sly, and he will destroy us any way he can. And that, for me, was a much greater risk than walking away from my faith. But I'm also an Enneagram 1. I like to do the right thing. I'm a good girl, always have been. So I think it was definitely a moment in time that captured my heart and challenged me. And I'm a strategic problem solver by strength. Like, if I take a strength finders test, that's my top strength. I like to solve problems. And I stumbled upon a problem that wasn't new, right? Poverty is an age old problem, but it was new for me. And I wanted to be a part of, like, I have so much. And here I am writing to mothers, and we all have so much. What we were doing was kind of silly. It meaningful, and there was nothing, wrong, but it was just not eternal. And I was like, God redeemed it. He redeemed what I was doing and used it for his glory. But there was that decision to give it to him, right? Like, to take this. I don't want to be an influencer and make a lot of money. I want to use this influence and fund a work that glorifies you and empowers vulnerable people. So if I had to do it all again, I couldn't. I'm not I don't know how many, there are people who, like, they're prolific founders, like they just start a lot of things. That's not me. I don't think I could recreate what I'm now living, even if I wanted to. And I think it's God's, and that is a good reminder. It is not mine. And I just get to be a very small part of it.
Well, God had clearly gifted you with some things that you were aware of. There was the skill of writing using your voice, an incredible community that had been
Mm-hmm.
forming for years. And you returned from this trip. I'm curious how you were able to start to communicate some of the things you were feeling to the people around you, to the people in your community, and how that kind of took shape as Mercy House Global.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was messy. If you go back and read those blog posts, I'm in labor. Literally, it is labor. And I remember a few months in where I wrote every day, and it was almost like a online journal. Just here's what I'm thinking, feeling, but it had a title and maybe a photograph. But I remember a woman emailed me one day, and she said, "It feels like you are going to give birth to something." And I remember thinking, that is weird and a crazy thing to say, but she was totally right. 6 months after that trip, Mercy House was born. but it was gut wrenching. And I think it was such a shift to talk about mom things and funny, cute stories and inspirational parenting hacks and tips, to go from that to deconstructing my American dream. Like, I have too much stuff. So it was a very painful journey. And it was, I mean, I killed my career as a blogger, literally, not overnight, but, I had to make a choice because I didn't have anyone else to help me do what I thought God was calling me to do. That blog community is who God gave me. And many, 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 many of those people are still donors all these years later. It was His purpose. The purpose was not for me to have a platform, it was just a springboard. And so, yeah, in some ways, I guess it was a sacrifice, but I am not one of those people that can handle notoriety or fame or probably winning the lottery. I don't think I would do so great. So obscurity is maybe my calling. Not to diminish that God has given me influence in a small way with the people that I am able to reach. I'm not trying to say that I don't realize I have some influence, but I'm not a New York Times bestseller, and I'm not, a lot of the people that were in that initial online blogging group, they're household names, right? Like, they're the women that are leading the Christian movement at this point, writers and speakers, and I'm not in that. And that's okay. I am getting to live God's will, and it's good. It's hard, but it's good.
Yeah, it's actually a really beautiful picture because, in a sense, it wasn't just like a theoretical life that you were turning away from. It's like one that you could actually watch played out
Mm-hmm.
in real time through a number of other people and know that, like,
Mm-hmm.
this probably some very similar flavor of this was a very real choice that was in front of me.
Yeah.
So it's
Yes.
not like, who knows what could have happened. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
I kind of do know what would have
Mm-hmm.
happened. And
Mm-hmm.
I feel like some of the deepest ways that God works in our lives are when He calls us to detach ourselves from something that's objectively good. There's nothing
Mm-hmm.
bad
Right.
about
Right.
that dream and trajectory you had, but
Of course.
but
Right.
He called you to kind of lay it on the altar, and
Mm-hmm.
you had no idea what to expect on the other side of that. But
Right.
I think those are some of the moments that we look back on over our whole lives, and
Mm-hmm.
it's most clear to see God was like so tangibly present in those moments. And everything you're
Mm-hmm.
saying sounds so much like that. I'd love to hear what that next season looked like as you start the process of trying to build a nonprofit organization from scratch. How did you
Mm-hmm.
start to surround yourself with a team and community? And I'm sure things have changed a lot in the last 16 years. So,
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to hear what your kind of strategy and intent was in the beginning, and then how that has evolved as your knowledge of the need and of how change happens and of how God works, and all of that has evolved over time.
It has been a wild, wild journey, but it happened just one small yes at a time. And you don't know what's going to happen, right? Like, we are a really bad investment. Like, no one would have ever, ever predicted that this would still be going. And not only, like, we have more clarity and we're a healthier organization we've ever been today. So it's just been such a wild ride. And I think I can really give God just 1,000% of the glory. I cannot take credit except that He led me through valleys of death, through storms. And I mean, people have literally died in the process. There's been so much spiritual warfare that I can't even describe it. I mean, we are actively trying to push back darkness by breaking up trafficking rings in Kenya and empowering families that are vulnerable. And even what we do now with refugees today, it's not popular. We're not trendy. Serving vulnerable people is not trendy. And it's not, in my opinion, it's not political. It's just loving your neighbor. But this day and age, everything feels political. So it's just been, I could just talk for hours because it's been such a journey. But just doing the next right thing, collaboration, finding people who are a lot smarter than me, who know things that I don't know, and asking for help. I read a lot of books. I'm a reader, so I've read hundreds of books at this point. I love to learn. And so I read books on, helping without hurting and financial merry-go-rounds and anything you could imagine I could get my hands on. How do we create an indigenous work without an American presence that has a plan for sustainability over the course of 30 or 40 years? Yeah, so it's just been a very difficult road. We're two organizations. We have an organization in Kenya and an organization in America. One funds the other. But we ended up starting maternity homes because we were very impacted by the plight of teenagers becoming moms, losing their right at an education. And at the time, I was writing to moms, and I was a young mom. I'm like, I just feel like we could connect the dots here. And so that's really where we started. We just had our 90th baby born. We have 3 maternity homes in Kenya, totally indigenous. They have like 25 staff, 3 homes. It's just beautiful. It's an oasis. There's a lot of empowerment happening with the family members of the girls, breaking generational cycles of poverty through vocational tracks, education, reconciliation, a lot of restoration, a lot of heartbreak, but it's working because God's working. And then about 9 years ago, it was taking so much time, energy, money, effort to fund everything we were doing in Kenya that I needed help here in America. And so I'm like, if I'm going to hire people to help me, maybe I could hire people who need work. And so that has now become a program called Local Hope, where we have vulnerable families, an internship program, a second chance employment. We have overcomers of human trafficking as coworkers. So we have 3 major programs: our global Rahema House, which is our maternity homes, our Local Hope program, which empowers vulnerable families locally in Houston. And then we have a subscription club that kind of does a little bit of both. It provides room in the market for artisan-made product that local and global families are making as a way to provide opportunities for their families. I didn't have a blueprint, it was doing one thing at a time that I felt led to do through prayer and educating myself and connecting with the right people. And all of that about killed me. About 13 years in, I was spiritually dying and didn't realize it. And so I took a big fat sabbatical at year 13. And I feel like that saved my life. So there is a cost to following Jesus. There's a cost to generosity. But at the end of the day, it's all an invitation. God doesn't need us to do any of this. He invites us to do it. And He gets the glory. We don't. And so I'm so thankful for the way that God loves us. And He knows where to find His sheep, He knows where to find His sheep. And so He put me on a path all those years ago to go after these little lost sheep. And then at some point, He revealed to me that He was coming after me, because it's easy to get off track, right? To feel like I have to do this. No one else can do it. It doesn't matter what it costs me. I don't have time to sit with Jesus because I'm so busy doing things for Him. These are dangerous things that we tell ourselves. And so I'm a few years removed from that, but I've come out of that really self-deception, and I understand that the enemy will use whatever he can to destroy us. So I just feel really grateful that to be loved by God and to be invited into this work. Yeah, it's the honor of my life, really.
I want to double back on some of what you're saying there, because I just have a sense that there are a lot of people listening right now who are living everything that you just described about, when you described feeling on the brink of death and
Hmm.
feeling like that in the name of Jesus, whether
Yeah,
whether
yeah.
that's trying to just live out generosity, live out
Hmm.
ministry work, live out something that they feel called to. If you think back 5 or 6 years ago and when this was at its peak, what would you say into somebody's life who is kind of walking in that season right now?
I would say that there is an invitation to an inner private chapel where we can commune with a best friend in the most intimate way that is better than anything else that we could do. Being with God is the best use of our time, practicing His presence. And it's so simple. It sounds so simple. It's so hard to do, but there's this invitation that's constantly a perpetual invitation to, stop, slow down, answer the knock at the door, right? That Jesus is always knocking at the door of our hearts, according to Revelation 3. He's standing at the door of our heart knocking. We have to open the door. And when we do, He will come in and sit with us and eat with us. And there's this opportunity to commune with God in a way that feels externally like a waste of time when you've got so much to do for Him, which is so ridiculous, right? Like we can hear the lie in that, but the enemy is so cunning and sly that, our significance is wrapped up in it and our pride and we can drift like Hebrews 2 says without even knowing it, right? Like I grew up going to the beach, living about 45 minutes from the ocean, and I remember I have a twin sister and we would always, take our big float out and my mom would say, okay, watch for me. Like, you're going to drift. And every once in a while, look back on the shore and find me, like spot me, right? And I remember we would be out there and just having fun and turn around to look for mom and we couldn't find her. And we had drifted so far off, right? Like a quarter of a mile, and we would reorient ourselves and come back to, where we could see her umbrella. And that's our faith journey, right? If we're not anchored to that inner chapel where Jesus is constantly present, wanting to live life with us and do life with us and walk with us and be our friend, then we're going to drift and we are not going to know we're drifting. And that is such a dangerous place to be because how many times, we think we're good, right? And why? Because we're checking the boxes. I was talking to my son the other day. He just got married. And so now we always have these really incredible theological conversations, and now they're over the phone. But he was like, Mom, I just feel like sometimes I treat Jesus like my probationary officer. And I was like, what do you know about a probationary officer? He was like, well, like I just check in with him to make sure I'm good. Like I'm just doing the things that Christians do, right? I am monitoring my faith. He was like, I don't always think about him as my friend. I want to be friends with God. And I was just like, yeah, like that. We have this, it's so hard to even define what is it like to be a friend of God. You have to spend time with him, right? Like you get to, but there's this like praying without ceasing opportunity to spend your life thinking about Jesus and reorienting yourself. And, for just a couple of years now, I've been trying to do that and it's really hard. But the more I do it, the more natural it gets, the more habitual, right? Like instead of, I've always really struggled with fear and worry. It has plagued me most of my life. And being able to, instead of like in my resting mode, I tend to overthink. And I find now that in my resting mode, I'm saying the Jesus prayer. I'm saying the Lord's Prayer, just like on repeat all the time. I'm talking to God. And that has happened just because of repetition, right? Like reorienting myself, recentering myself. And then I mess up and I go 4 or 5 hours and I'm like, oh, I hadn't even thought of you, God. I'm like, okay, I'm going to start again. I'm going to do this again. I'm going to reorient myself again so that I don't forget you. I don't leave you behind because you care about this decision I'm making right now. You're here with me and you want to do life with me. And I think if we can live in that place, it doesn't matter what happens to us. I mean, it matters, but it doesn't shake our faith, you know? It doesn't mean it's not hard and there's not suffering, but I understand a little bit more about Paul, who was in prison, being flogged and tortured and suffering. And he says, in all things, give thanks or be content. I mean, how can he say that? I've never understood that. I'm just like, it's not rational, right? To be suffering. And I was listening to this podcast the other day and they were talking about like, they weren't getting like 3 meals a day. It was probably, someone was bringing them food or a change of clothes or, there weren't probably great services in the prison. And so it's not even like incarceration like we have today. It was just probably very, very inhumane with none of the needs being met. And here he is, I can be content in all things. And I think it's because he was turning into that inner sanctuary and he was communing with God. It wasn't that it wasn't really hard. It was still suffering, but he was able to say that because he unlocked the door to satisfaction in Jesus, right? It's like, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He could say that because Jesus was with him. And I'm nowhere near there, but that's where I want to be. And it feels more important to me than anything I do. And, I raise money for a living at this point. I'm the CEO of this organization. It's my job to make sure we have the resources we need. Super hard. Like, I don't like that. I'm an English major. I would much rather write stories. I mean, it's an honor and it's a part of what I do. But this past year, I was like, I'm going to try something new. I'm going to spend more time praying for donors and asking God to speak to them than I am going to physically call people. And I'm going to surrender. I'm going to do everything I know to do, but I'm going to spend more time praying about this than anything else. And in an economy that's really struggling, we ended our year with more than enough, which is miraculous. And it's because it's not a waste of time. It is not a waste of time to spend time with God. And he's in charge, right? And I would rather model what it looks like to sit with Jesus than beg someone to be a part of something and make them feel guilty. And right, like there's an invitation always, but discovering the secret place only happens when we turn down the noise. And we live in a world that is never going to encourage us to do that. So we have to.
Kristen, it's interesting because as you were telling some of your story, it's easy to think of it as like you walked away from a career that many people would love to have. But as a result of the experience that God led you through in Kenya, you kept saying invitation. Like he really gave you an opportunity to engage more of yourself and eventually all of yourself into where he would lead you. And it led you to the end of yourself, to the point where you're like, I can't do this anymore. This is too hard. This is too big of a problem. And he met you all along the way, but especially in that moment. And I'm curious how you've learned to understand God as a generous God and learn to receive
Mm,
good things from him instead of just try to live out the things that he's asked you to do, but
hmm.
instead to really trust him to care for you as a loving father.
Yeah. I had this moment like a week into my sabbatical where I went to my board of directors and told my staff, if I don't take a sabbatical, I can't stay. Like, I am so burned out and tired. And I went from, a younger, I have all the answers to I know nothing to I don't care. I don't care what the answers are. I have nothing left to give. I've given it all. And so that's kind of how I started my sabbatical. And I was so desperate to find Jesus again. And it's terrifying to be a Christian leader and you can't find Christ. That is such a hard place to be. And I think it's a really common place, unfortunately. And I knew that I needed to spend some time in silence and solitude. Like, I just felt this, and I was scared to death to do that. That sounded terrible, but I just felt this call to like quiet everything and just me and the Lord and nothing else. No phone, Bible, anything. And I just took off I lived in a house that had woods behind my house. And I just like, I'm just going to walk. And I was walking in these woods behind my house. And I was just like, I don't know who I am. And I kept saying that. And it was this weird identity crisis, but it was just me and God. And he knows who I am. And I was just like, I don't know who I am. And what I meant by that is, I don't know what the heck I'm going to do with myself for 110 days if I'm not doing things for you, right? Like, I am good at doing things for God. I can rock a to-do list and I love feeling needed. And what was so dangerous for me is I needed the organization as much as it needed me. Very unhealthy for the organization and for the leader, right? Like, that is never a good place to be. If you need it and it needs you to survive, that's a red flag. And so the best thing I could do was step away, but I was terrified and I just was like, God, who am I? And I was crying and just emptying myself, and I finally just slumped down next to a tree and just wept and said out loud, God, who am I? And I just sat there and just this calm presence came over me, and I just felt God's presence and just this little whisper, you're my child. That's it. That's what I heard. You are my kid. That's who you are. And that just brought on a whole new, fresh wave of tears. And I remember saying, but what if I don't go back to work? What if I don't have Mercy House Global? And God was like, you're still my kid, and you don't have to do anything else to be my kid. You don't have to do, that's an invitation to be a part of this. That's not who you are. And so I think it's such a simple, we know this, we know who we are in Christ, but it's easy to forget that he doesn't require us to check things off a list. He wants to be our father. And yeah, I go back to that moment a lot because at the end of the day, that's the most important thing, that I'm his and he's mine. And because of that, everything's going to be okay.
Yeah, there is so much to unpack there. And I think that is where God is trying to get all of us. And the path to that place looks different in
Mm-hmm.
each of our contexts, but it's really powerful to hear how God used all these circumstances that he's, brought about in your life, all these giftings and stuff, and how he shaped all of that to get you to, that moment where he could really be that close to you, and then to kind of launch this whole new season. And honestly, I think he just does that over and over in our lives.
Yeah, so
It's like
true.
chapters of our lives where
Mm-hmm.
And, that compassion trip was almost like that, a whole different chapter. And
Mm-hmm.
he
Mm-hmm.
completely changed you through that. And then now it's like we just spiral deeper and deeper and deeper into proximity with him. And honestly, that's what I think we're going to spend eternity doing, is just like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
infinite layers of being closer to God.
Mm.
And we get a glimpse or a taste of that in this life. But I think that, he's an infinite God, and there's
Mm-hmm.
infinite layers like that. And, I'm just scratching the surface
Mm-hmm.
myself, but
Mm-hmm.
that's what I want to. I want to pivot for a minute because another big part of what you have done is bring your family along with you through this whole journey that we've been talking about. You
Mm-hmm.
have several incredible books: Raising Grateful Kids in an Entitled World, Raising World Changers. I'd love to hear what the experience has been like raising kids through all of this transformation that you were going through, how you engaged them along the way, and how you would encourage other people who are kind of in that same season.
Yeah, that was again sort of not my plan, but I do think we model whether we want to or not. And so the trip for Kenya was, I went on the trip, but when I returned, it changed me. It changed my family. And I think it revealed things. It revealed a lot of entitlement, a lot of selfishness on my part, and that I was modeling some unhealthy things for my kids. And so as I began to adjust and make these little shifts, which that's really what you're doing as a parent, right? You're modifying, you're shifting, you try to turn the whole ship around. There's going to be mutiny. It's just little changes. But as we began those little changes, we just saw more and more opportunities for our family to really live this out in a way that changes our day to day. And, you don't have to go to another country to be an intentional parent who raises a missional family. And we have the world right outside of our front door. Loving your neighbor is just loving your neighbor, right? It's being Jesus to people in our community and on our street, and the single moms and the widows and orphans. It's showing up. And that's actually how we got involved in refugee work through Mercy House, was just loving our neighbors, realizing there were a lot of people in our own community who were vulnerable, and how can we love them. And so everything that we did was just an organic extension of loving our neighbors. I mean, I remember when my youngest, she's a freshman at UT, but when she was 5 years old in kindergarten, she wanted to have a play date, and this was her first play date. And so, I set it up with another mom, and she brought this little friend over, and she was giving her a tour of our house, and it was hilarious. It was like, this is my mom and dad's room, and this is our kitchen. And we had all of these kids on our refrigerator that we, supported through Mercy House, like a child sponsorship program. And my daughter was like, and these are the kids that we help in another country. She was like, who's on your refrigerator? And it was just I remember just laughing, when I overheard it, because for her, it was just like, this is part of the tour. This is the bathroom and this is the people we help. So, what does your bathroom look like and who do you help? And that is sort of how we introduced this idea to our kids, just including them. And in their context, what does it look like to love your neighbor, right? The kid that's picking on you or that's irritating you. And it's really, I wrote Raising Grateful Kids 10 years ago. It came out 10 years ago this month. And I've been doing a little bit of speaking lately, I think, because people are like, is it true? Did that really, are they grateful? And my kids are now 26, 23, and 19. And it's so fun all these years later to see them loving their neighbors, to my oldest is a mentor to a refugee child in another city. And, my son leads a small group and loves his neighbors in his apartment building. And right, like we're raising these humans who are going to model how we live. And if I could go back and say, because people ask me all the time, what's the one thing, everyone wants that one silver bullet that you would say or do differently or what, and hands down, without a doubt, I would model what it looks like to sit with Jesus. That is what I would do more of. I would let them see me weeping before God, crying out to him when I was suffering or in despair. I would not hide my relationship with God. I would let them see what it looks like to wrestle in my faith, to doubt God, to question him, because that's all that matters, right? Not having kids who, if they finish college and they get careers and they have wonderful families and they're successful, all of that is just bonus. Like, that's wonderful. But do they know Jesus? Can they find Jesus, right? Like, is he their friend? Are they going to walk with him? Are they going to choose to follow him? The only way that is going to happen is they follow breadcrumbs, right? We can't decide that for them, but we can lead them by our own example and show them what it looks like to commune with God and to turn to him when we walk through the valley of the shadow of death. It's the greatest thing we can give our kids. And I think the same goes with generosity, right? Like sharing what we have, letting our kids be a part of that and seeing us share what we have. What we do speaks so much louder than what we say. And hypocrisy is a problem because we talk a lot, right? We say a lot. We say, you've had enough screen time, but we can't get off our phones, right? We say you should share your toys, but we don't share our resources. Like, kids are so smart. They pick up on that hypocrisy. They can sniff it out. When we live as generous people, our kids will too.
Clearly, throughout your journey, you've just gained a deeper appreciation for the things that God has entrusted to you and continued to provide you, and to pass that along to your kids. I mean, what a legacy that will have in their lives. And if they decide to start families, that posture allows generosity to flow more freely. Kristen, if people listening to this want to learn more about Mercy House or about your books that you've written, where can they find those resources?
So I have a website, kristengwelch.com, that is going to actually be announcing my newest book in the next few weeks, I think. But also mercyhouseglobal.org has a lot of information about how to connect with our nonprofit.
Awesome. And, we've covered so much ground in this conversation. I'm very curious, what are you most excited for as you think about the next 5 or 10 years?
Oh, well, I'm brand new to the empty nest, like brand spanking new, just a few months in. And I have mixed feelings about it, but probably grandkids. My son got married a few months ago. My daughter gets married in about 4 months. I'm hoping to become a grandmother in the next 5 years. I also have 2 books coming out with Zondervan. I haven't written anything in 5 years, and so I'm excited to see what God will do with that. I think I'm finally, after 16 years at Mercy House, like living and working as the visionary, where I'm not doing 1,000 jobs. And so writing and speaking, I feel like there's space for that now, which is kind of how I got started. So, maybe I'll get a little bit of that career that, I gave up. But yeah, I'm excited to see what God's going to do.
Before we get to the end of our episode, we like to end every episode with what we call our Manager's Minute, just a suggestion for how our listeners can live out their role as stewards and manage God's wealth wisely. So do you have a suggestion for our listeners today?
I do. I actually in this women's group called Women Doing Well, and it's a generosity group that you just learn about how to, come up with like a generosity statement and as a woman navigate your resources. And in the group this week, they challenged us to spontaneously be generous. And so the next time someone is like, you have an opportunity to, in the moment, be spontaneously generous, do it. And so they had all these crazy examples of like literally giving the clothes off their back, taking earrings out of their ear, like just sharing what they had as just a way to, and it kind of the rule was give something you can't replace. Like, because if you're a resource, you can just go out and buy the same thing again, but give sacrificially to and bless someone. And I loved that. And so I personally am taking that challenge because I am more of a planner and I like to plan my generosity and budget it, which I realize is ironic, but I have more than I need. And so knowing that there's something I have that would bless someone else, that kind of feels like a fun challenge. So yeah, be spontaneously generous and see where that takes you.
Yeah, I think that is a fantastic challenge and certainly one that will lead to some very interesting stories. So I hope many people take you up on that. Kristen, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. This has been an incredible conversation. It is just a huge blessing to be able to see all the different seasons that God has brought you through and how he has shaped you into what you're doing today. So thanks for taking the time to be with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to the show, guys. If you want to find any references or links from today's show, you can always find them in our show notes at finishlinepledge.com/episode 175. And if you'd like to get in touch, we would love to hear from you. Just send us an email at hello@finishlinepledge.com. Now, as most of you know, on the Finish Line podcast, we are all about stories, seeing how God draws us into generosity over a lifetime. But sometimes these stories can leave us thinking, what's the next step look like for me? That's exactly why we've launched a whole new podcast called Applied Generosity, which explores the full landscape of the generous life across 7 different dimensions of generosity. Applied Generosity helps make sense of the hundreds of stories we've shared on the Finish Line podcast to help you find that best next step. If you've been inspired by these stories and want to take things to the next level, check out Applied Generosity anywhere you listen to podcasts or at appliedgenerosity.com. That's all we have for today. We'll see you next time.